The Montana sun cast long shadows across Redemption Creek as Silas Blackwood rode into town, his weathered face telling stories the local folk could only guess at. At 48, he wore his years like the battered leather duster that hung from his broad shoulders, with quiet dignity and the marks of hard-earned experience. His arrival stirred little interest among the townsfolk, most too consumed with their own struggles to notice another drifter passing through. The main street, lined with false-fronted buildings and hitching posts, stretched before him like a path to somewhere both familiar and foreign. Silas had been riding for 3 days straight, putting distance between himself and memories that haunted him like vengeful spirits. The war between the states had ended 15 years ago, but for men like him, the battles never truly ceased. They just changed form, moved inward, became private wars fought in silent moments when the world wasn't watching. I would be mighty obliged if you would subscribe to the channel now. I'm curious to know, what city are you watching from today? The town's single hotel, a 2-story affair with peeling paint and a crooked sign, would serve as shelter for the night. Silas dismounted with practiced ease, wincing slightly at the old bullet wound in his hip, a parting gift from a Confederate sharpshooter outside Vicksburg. He led his chestnut mare to the water trough, allowing her to drink deeply while he surveyed his surroundings with watchful eyes. Redemption Creek had grown since he'd passed through 5 years prior. The railroad had finally reached this far west, bringing with it the promise of prosperity and the certainty of change. The station stood at the far end of town, smoke still rising from a recently departed train. New faces had come with the railroad, merchants seeking fortune, laborers following work, women looking for a fresh start. But the saloon still dominated the town center, its raucous piano music spilling onto the street along with the occasional drunk cowhand. After securing lodging for himself and a stall for his horse, Silas made his way toward the saloon. Not for the whiskey, though his throat felt parched as the desert flats he'd crossed. Information was what he sought, and saloons were the wellspring of frontier knowledge. The establishment called itself the Silver Dollar, a name as unimaginative as the watered-down liquor it likely served. Pushing through the swinging doors, Silas entered a world of tobacco smoke, off-key piano notes, and conversations that hushed momentarily at the sight of a stranger. The barkeep, a round man with a graying mustache, nodded in acknowledgement as Silas approached. "Whiskey," Silas requested, his voice rough from disuse and trail dust. The bartender slid a glass across the polished wooden surface, studying Silas with the practiced eye of a man who'd seen all types come and go. "Passing through or staying a spell?" the barkeep inquired, making conversation the way barmen do. "Depends," Silas replied, taking a measured sip of the amber liquid, unsurprised to find it was indeed watered down. "Looking for work that suits my particular talents." He didn't elaborate, and the bartender didn't press. In a place like Redemption Creek, a man's business was his own until it became someone else's problem. The saloon's patrons had resumed their activities. Card games continued, conversations flowed, and in the corner, a young piano player with nimble fingers coaxed a melancholy tune from the worn instrument. Silas noticed her immediately, though he tried not to stare. She wasn't like the other women in the establishment. The painted ladies who circulated among the tables, offering companionship at a price. This one kept to herself, her focus on the keys before her, as if the music provided escape from the coarse surroundings. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a simple style, and her dress, while modest, spoke of better days gone by. The bartender followed Silas's gaze and offered uninvited information. "That's Miss Eleanor Hart. Been playing here about 6 months now. Keeps to herself mostly. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. Word is she came from back east. Something happened to her in the war. Never speaks of it, but she came west like most folks, looking to bury the past. Silas nodded but said nothing. The war had left its mark on countless souls. There was a story there, written in the slight furrow of her brow, and the deliberate way she avoided meeting anyone's gaze. The night wore on, and the saloon gradually emptied as men returned to homes or rented rooms, or simply passed out where they sat. Silas nursed his second whiskey, watching as Eleanor Hart ended her performance with a soft, haunting melody that seemed out of place among the usual saloon tunes. As she rose from the piano bench, she adjusted her shawl with careful precision, ensuring it covered her completely despite the warmth of the room. Their eyes met briefly across the smoky expanse, a fleeting connection that spoke of mutual recognition, not of faces, but of something deeper, the unspoken understanding between those who carry invisible burdens. She looked away quickly, gathering her small payment from the bartender before making her way toward the door. Silas remained seated, finishing his drink in thoughtful silence. Tomorrow, he would seek out the town's marshal, inquire about bounties in the territory. Tonight, he would wrestle with the ghosts that always seemed to find him in the quiet hours. Dawn broke over Redemption Creek, bathing the dusty streets in golden light. Silas rose early. As was his habit, a discipline formed during his years as a scout for the Union Army. After a simple breakfast at the hotel's adjoining restaurant, he made his way to the marshal's office, a small wooden building distinguished only by the tarnished star mounted beside its door. Marshal Tom Wilson was a man of about 60, with a steel-gray mustache and eyes that had seen enough trouble to last several lifetimes. He looked up from his desk as Silas entered, sizing him up with a lawman's practiced scrutiny. "Help you, stranger?" he inquired, his hand casually resting near the revolver at his hip. Silas recognized the stance of a cautious man who'd survived by anticipating trouble before it announced itself. He respected that. "Name's Silas Blackwood," he offered, remaining near the doorway to ease the marshal's wariness. "Bounty hunter by trade, looking for work in these parts." Wilson's expression remained neutral, but his posture relaxed slightly. "Blackwood," he repeated, as if testing the name against his memory. "Heard that name. You the one they called the Reckoner during the Mason County troubles?" Silas nodded once, neither proud nor ashamed of the reputation that preceded him. "That was a time ago. I'm more selective about the jobs I take these days." The marshal reached into his desk drawer, producing a stack of wanted posters. "Got a few outstanding warrants. Nothing that would interest a man of your caliber, I expect." He spread the posters across the desk. Petty thieves, horse rustlers, the usual miscreants of frontier justice. Silas scanned them without much interest until one name caught his eye: Jedediah Crane. The poster offered $500 for Crane, wanted for armed robbery and murder in 3 territories. "This one," Silas said, tapping the paper with a calloused finger. "Know anything about him?" "Crane's a nasty piece of work," Wilson confirmed, leaning back in his creaking chair. "Last seen in these parts about 2 weeks ago. Rumor has it he's holed up with a gang in the foothills north of here. Local rancher, Emmett Carson, claims they've been rustling his cattle, but nobody's been able to catch them at it." The marshal studied Silas with renewed interest. "You sure about taking this one? Crane travels with at least 4 men, all of them handy with guns and not particular about who they shoot." Silas folded the poster and tucked it into his coat pocket. "I've handled worse odds," he replied simply. As he turned to leave, Wilson called after him. "Word of advice, Blackwood. Town's seeing some changes. Railroad brought money, but also trouble. Watch yourself around the new bank manager, fellow named Harrington. He's got the mayor and half the town council in his pocket. Been buying up properties, forcing folks out. Nothing illegal, mind you, just the kind of man who makes me check my guns loaded." The warning registered with Silas, who had seen enough frontier towns transformed by ambitious men with Eastern money and ruthless methods. He'd steer clear of local politics. His business was with Crane and whatever blood money the outlaw would bring. Stepping back onto the street, Silas nearly collided with a woman exiting the general store, her arms full of parcels. "Pardon me, ma'am," he said automatically, steadying her with a gentle hand on her elbow. It was the piano player, Eleanor Hart, her features softer in the morning light, but no less guarded. "No harm done," she replied, her voice surprisingly melodious, even in those few words. Up close, he noticed the faint tracery of a scar along the side of her neck before she adjusted her collar to conceal it. Their eyes met again, and this time held for a moment longer. Something in her gaze, wariness mingled with recognition, perhaps, stirred his curiosity. "Miss Hart, isn't it? I enjoyed your playing at the saloon last night." His words were cordial, nothing more, but they seemed to make her uncomfortable. "Thank you, Mr. Blank," she replied, a question in her tone. "Blackwood, Silas Blackwood." He tipped his hat slightly, maintaining a respectful distance. "New to Redemption Creek myself. Seems a decent enough place." Eleanor shifted her parcels, clearly eager to continue on her way. "It serves its purpose," she answered cryptically. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. Blackwood." She moved past him with quiet dignity, her back straight as a cavalry officer's. Silas watched her go, puzzled by the brief exchange. There was something familiar about her, though he was certain they'd never met. Perhaps it was merely the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else carrying the weight of the past across the vast expanse of the frontier. The next 3 days passed in preparation. Silas resupplied his ammunition, had his horse reshod by the local blacksmith, and gathered what intelligence he could about Crane and his gang. The foothills north of town were rugged country, perfect for outlaws seeking to evade the law. Each evening, he returned to the Silver Dollar, ostensibly to listen for useful information, though he found himself increasingly drawn to Eleanor Hart's piano playing. She performed with a quiet passion that belied her reserved demeanor, her fingers expressing what her words did not. On the third night, after most patrons had departed, Silas approached the piano as she was gathering her sheet music. "You play beautifully," he commented, maintaining a respectful distance. "Reminds me of someone I knew long ago." Eleanor glanced up, surprise evident in her blue-gray eyes. "My mother taught me," she said after a moment's hesitation, "before the war." It was the most personal information she'd volunteered, and Silas recognized it as the tentative offering it was. "Music like yours doesn't belong in a place like this," he observed, gesturing at the now empty saloon with its spilled drinks and lingering smoke. A sad smile touched her lips, so briefly he might have imagined it. "Few things end up where they belong, Mr. Blackwood. Least of all people." With that enigmatic statement, she secured her music in a worn leather folder. "I understand you're hunting Jedediah Crane," she said, changing the subject abruptly. The statement caught Silas off guard. He hadn't discussed his plans openly. "Word travels fast in small towns," she explained, noting his surprise. "Be careful. Crane isn't just an outlaw. He has connections, powerful ones." Before he could question her further, she gathered her shawl around her shoulders and bid him good night, leaving Silas to ponder her warning. Dawn had barely broken when Silas rode out of Redemption Creek, following a trail that led into the foothills. According to local reports, Crane and his men had established a camp near an abandoned mining operation in Cooper's Ravine, about 15 miles north. The terrain grew increasingly challenging as Silas ascended, the path narrowing between rocky outcroppings that could easily conceal ambushers. His years as a scout had taught him to read the landscape, to distinguish between natural shadows and those cast by waiting men. By midday, he had reached a vantage point overlooking the ravine. Through his field glasses, he could make out the remains of the mining camp, several dilapidated structures, a collapsed shaft entrance, and evidence of recent habitation. Smoke rose from one chimney, and 4 horses were corralled in what had once been an ore processing yard. Crane's men were clearly there, but caution dictated observation before action. For 2 hours, Silas watched the camp, noting the movements of men between buildings, establishing patterns and weaknesses. He counted only 3 men, not the 5 he'd expected. Either his intelligence was wrong, or some of the gang were absent, perhaps on a raid or supply run. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, he decided to make his move after nightfall, when darkness would provide cover for his approach. Settling into a sheltered position, Silas checked his weapons one final time. The Colt revolver that had served him faithfully through a dozen manhunts, and the Winchester rifle that could reach targets his pistol could not. His mind drifted unexpectedly to Eleanor Hart and her cryptic warning. What connections could an outlaw like Crane possibly have that would concern her? The question lingered as daylight faded, and the mountains cast long shadows across the ravine. Under the cover of darkness, Silas made his approach, moving silently despite the rocky terrain. Years of tracking both men and animals had taught him to place each foot with deliberate care, avoiding loose stones that might betray his presence. The mining camp lay in near complete darkness now, save for a single lantern visible through a grimy window of the main building. Voices carried on the night air, rough, whiskey-slurred exchanges punctuated by occasional laughter. From his new position behind a tumble-down equipment shed, Silas could make out 3 distinct voices, confirming his earlier count. He drew his Colt, checked that each chamber was loaded, and prepared to move closer. His plan was straightforward: enter quietly through the rear of the building, take them by surprise, and subdue Crane while covering the others. Simple, direct, the way he preferred to work. But as he rose to move forward, the distinctive sound of approaching horses froze him in place. 2 riders appeared at the edge of the camp, moving at a leisurely pace that suggested they had no inkling of danger. As they passed beneath the moon's pale light, Silas recognized the larger man as Crane from the wanted poster, a hulking figure with a distinctive scar across his nose. The second rider was smaller, more elegantly dressed, and utterly unexpected in this company. Even in the dim light, Silas could make out the tailored suit and bowler hat of someone more suited to a boardroom than an outlaw camp. The new arrivals dismounted, exchanging words too low for Silas to catch before entering the main building. The unexpected development forced a change in plans. Now he faced not 3 men, but 5, including a wild card whose presence made no sense. Patience had saved his life more than once, and instinct told him to wait, to gather more information before acting. Inside the building, the conversation grew louder, more heated. Through a crack in the wall, Silas could see Crane and his men gathered around a rough-hewn table, the well-dressed stranger standing slightly apart. The arrangement was clear, the stranger was saying, his cultured voice at odds with his surroundings. You handle the dirty work, and I ensure no questions are asked. But this, he gestured angrily, this reckless behavior puts everything at risk. Crane's laugh was ugly, threatening. You don't give the orders here, Harrington. We got the job done, didn't we? Old man Carson won't be causing any more trouble for your railroad plans. The name registered immediately with Silas. Harrington, the bank manager Wilson had warned him about. The pieces began falling into place, a picture forming of corruption far deeper than a simple outlaw gang. The realization came with another, more disturbing thought. If Carson had been silenced, likely murdered, then the warrant for Crane was only the surface of a much larger conspiracy. The argument inside continued, tensions rising between Harrington and Crane. The woman is becoming a problem, Harrington stated coldly. She's asking questions about Carson's death, connecting dots that should remain disconnected. Handle it, but quietly this time. Crane's response was lost as the outlaw moved away from the crack in the wall, but his meaning was clear enough. Someone else was marked for death, someone who had uncovered the same conspiracy Silas was now witnessing. His mind raced through possibilities. Who in Redemption Creek would have both the courage and the insight to challenge men like these? The answer came with sudden, chilling clarity. Eleanor Hart's warning, her knowledge of Crane's connections. She was the threat Harrington wanted eliminated. Silas's mission had just become significantly more complicated. No longer was he simply hunting a wanted outlaw. He was now entangled in a web of murder and corruption that threatened an innocent woman. The meeting concluded with terse agreements and veiled threats from both parties. Harrington departed alone, riding back toward town under the watchful moon. Silas remained hidden, revising his strategy. Taking on Crane and his 3 men was risky, but feasible. The immediate threat to Eleanor added urgency that outweighed caution. When the outlaws had settled in for the night, 2 apparently sleeping, while Crane and 1 other remained at the table sharing a bottle, Silas made his move. The rear door's hinges surrendered to oil and patience, allowing him silent entry. In the dim lantern light, he took aim at Crane first, the most dangerous target, and announced his presence with cold authority. Hands where I can see them, gentlemen. Jedediah Crane, I have a warrant for your arrest. Chaos erupted in the confined space. The outlaw nearest Crane went for his gun and died for the effort. Silas's bullet finding its mark with practiced precision. Crane himself upended the heavy table as a shield, drawing his revolver with remarkable speed for a man of his size. The third outlaw, awakened by the gunshot, scrambled for a shotgun propped against the far wall. Silas calculated his odds in the split second that followed. Crane was partially protected by the table, the third man still unarmed but moving fast. He shifted his aim and fired twice, catching the third outlaw in mid-lunge, sending him crashing to the floor with a strangled cry. Now it was down to Crane and himself. "It's over, Crane," Silas called, seeking a clear shot as the outlaw leader crouched behind his makeshift barricade. "Drop the gun and you'll live to see trial." Crane's response was a barking laugh, followed by a wild shot that splintered the doorframe inches from Silas's head. "You've got no idea what you're stepping into, bounty hunter," Crane growled. "Men bigger than you have tried to take me down. Their bones are bleaching in the sun." The standoff continued for tense moments, neither man willing to expose himself to the other's aim. "Harrington sent you, didn't he?" Crane called, trying to distract Silas or draw information. Decided I was a liability? Silas remained silent, eyes scanning for any movement, any opportunity. When it came, it was sudden. Crane making a desperate lunge toward a side window, firing blindly as he moved. Silas's reflexes, honed by years of similar confrontations, served him well. His bullet caught Crane in the shoulder, spinning the big man around and sending his gun clattering across the rough plank floor. The outlaw staggered, but remained standing, blood darkening his shirt. "Go on, then," he snarled, hatred burning in his eyes. "Finish it!" Silas kept his Colt trained on Crane's chest as he moved forward. "I bring men in alive when I can," he replied evenly. "Rewards the same either way." Using a length of rope from his pocket, Silas secured Crane's hands behind his back, ignoring the outlaw's stream of curses and threats. The immediate danger contained, he quickly searched the cabin, finding evidence that confirmed his suspicions. Letters bearing Harrington's signature, detailing payments for services rendered, including dates that coincided with Carson's disappearance. Most damning was a list of names, some crossed out, others circled. Eleanor Hart's name was among those circled, with tomorrow's date written beside it. The conspiracy was larger and more organized than he'd imagined, reaching beyond Crane and his small gang to the economic and political heart of Redemption Creek. Silas pocketed the documents and returned to his prisoner. "We're riding back to town, Crane. You've got an appointment with Marshal Wilson and a long list of charges to answer for." The journey back to Redemption Creek was arduous, made more so by Crane's wounded condition and constant verbal abuse. They reached town shortly after dawn, attracting stares as Silas marched his prisoner down the main street toward the marshal's office. Wilson emerged at the commotion, eyebrows rising at the sight of Crane bound and bloodied. "Didn't expect to see him breathing," the lawman commented as Silas transferred custody of the outlaw. "Nor these," Silas added, producing the documents he'd recovered. "Evidence of a conspiracy involving your bank manager, Harrington. Murder for hire, land grabs, threats against citizens." Wilson's expression darkened as he scanned the papers. Suspected something wasn't right, but this... He shook his head grimly. "This goes beyond what I imagined. Harrington's got friends in the territorial capital, powerful ones." "There's more," Silas continued, lowering his voice. "Eleanor Hart is in danger. Harrington's ordered Crane's remaining men to silence her, likely today." Wilson's head snapped up at that. "Miss Eleanor? Why would they—" Understanding dawned in his weathered features. Carson was her uncle. "She came to me last week, asking questions about his disappearance. I told her to let it lie, that there was no evidence of foul play." Regret creased his face. Seems she didn't heed that advice. Silas was already moving toward the door. "Lock Crane up tight and watch your back. I'm gonna find Miss Hart." The urgency in his voice must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, for Wilson merely nodded, reaching for the keys to the strongest cell. "Godspeed, Blackwood. I'll send deputies to back you up once Crane's secured." The morning sun cast long shadows across Redemption Creek as Silas strode purposefully toward the modest boarding house where Eleanor had taken rooms. His inquiries at the saloon had yielded her address and the information that she usually practiced piano at the church in the early morning hours. The small white clapboard building stood on the outskirts of town, its spire reaching toward the clear blue sky. As Silas approached, the soft notes of a piano drifted through the open windows. Not the lively saloon tunes, but something deeper, more soulful. He entered quietly, not wishing to disturb the music or startle Eleanor. She sat with her back to the door, lost in the melody, her honey-blonde hair catching the light that streamed through the stained glass windows. For a moment, Silas simply listened, struck by the beauty of both the music and its player. Then he noticed the side door of the church was slightly ajar, when all others were closed against the morning chill. Instinct and experience sent warning signals coursing through him. "Miss Hart," he called softly but urgently, moving toward the piano. She turned, surprise evident in her expression. "Mr. Blackwood, what are you—" Her words died as Silas reached her side, taking her arm gently but firmly. "We need to leave. Now. You're in danger." Confusion and alarm flashed across her face, but she allowed him to guide her from the piano bench. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Crane's men," he explained tersely, leading her toward a side door different from the one he'd noticed ajar. "Harrington ordered them to silence you. I've arrested Crane, but at least one of his gang is still free." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by a grim determination that impressed Silas. There was steel in this woman, beneath the genteel exterior. "I knew Harrington was behind Uncle Emmett's disappearance," she said, as they slipped outside. "I found letters, bank records showing how he'd been pressuring landowners, using threats when money didn't work." They moved quickly toward the cover of nearby buildings, Silas keeping Eleanor close as his eyes scanned for threats. "Carson was your uncle?" he asked, pieces falling into place. She nodded, grief momentarily shadowing her features. "He took me in after the war, when I had nowhere else to go." The slight hesitation spoke volumes about unspoken traumas. "I came west with him 3 years ago. He was a good man, stubborn, proud, but good. He refused to sell his ranch to Harrington's railroad interests, even when the threats began." Their conversation ceased as Silas guided them through a narrow alley between the general store and the blacksmith's shop, taking a circuitous route back toward the marshal's office. "Wilson knows about Harrington now," he informed her. "With Crane's testimony and the documents I found, they can bring charges." A flash of movement ahead caused Silas to pull Eleanor into a shadowed doorway, his hand instinctively moving to his revolver. A rider passed at the end of the alley, one of Crane's men, Silas was certain, by the distinctive red bandana and unkempt beard. "They're searching the town for you," he murmured, keeping Eleanor shielded with his body. Their proximity in the narrow doorway created an unexpected intimacy, her breath warm against his neck as they waited for the danger to pass. "Why did you come for me?" she asked softly, her eyes searching his face. "You don't know me, owe me nothing." The question caught him off guard with its directness. "Couldn't stand by and let harm come to an innocent," he replied simply. A sad smile touched her lips. "Innocent," she repeated, as if testing the word. "It's been a long time since anyone thought of me that way." The rider disappeared from view, and they resumed their careful journey through back streets and service alleys. "Marshal Wilson's office is the safest place for now," Silas explained as they neared the center of town. "Once Harrington realizes Crane's been captured, he'll either run or try to cover his tracks. Either way." His words cut off abruptly as a shot rang out, the bullet splintering the wooden siding inches from Eleanor's head. Silas reacted instantly, pulling her down behind a water trough as a second shot followed the first. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his Colt and peering cautiously around their cover. The shooter had positioned himself on the roof of the Mercantile across the street, a tactically sound choice that gave him both elevation and clear lines of sight. Silas recognized him as the second outlaw from Crane's gang, a lean, wolf-like man known only as Dawson, according to the wanted posters. "Can't hide forever, Blackwood," Dawson called, the morning breeze carrying his voice clearly. "Hand over the woman and ride out. This ain't your fight." Eleanor tensed beside Silas, but her expression showed resolve rather than fear. "I can create a distraction," she whispered, eyeing the narrow gap between their current position and the cover of a nearby wagon. Silas shook his head firmly. "Too risky. He's waiting for movement." His mind raced through options, calculating angles and opportunities. The marshal's office was tantalizingly close, just 50 yards down the street, but the open ground between made it an impossible dash under fire. As if reading his thoughts, Eleanor spoke again. "There's a cellar entrance to Donovan's store right behind us. It connects to the tunnels beneath the main street. Remnants from the original mining camp before the town was built properly." The information changed everything. "You're sure?" Silas asked, already shifting to examine the ground behind their shelter. Eleanor nodded, pointing to a nearly invisible trapdoor set into the dirt. "Uncle Emmett showed me when I first arrived. Said a lady should always know her escape routes in a frontier town." There was a ghost of a smile in her words, pride mingled with sorrow at the memory. Another shot kicked up dirt near their position, reminding them of the pressing danger. Working quickly, Silas located the trapdoor's edge and lifted it while Eleanor kept watch. The opening revealed a short ladder leading down into darkness. "You first," he directed, covering her as she descended. Dawson, realizing his quarry was escaping, abandoned caution and fired rapidly, forcing Silas to duck lower behind the water trough. When the shooting paused, likely for reloading, Silas seized his moment, firing twice toward Dawson's position before dropping through the trapdoor and pulling it shut above him. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by thin shafts of light filtering through cracks in the trapdoor. "There should be a lantern near the ladder," Eleanor whispered, her voice oddly composed given the circumstances. Silas's hand found the object exactly where she'd indicated, along with matches. The small flame illuminated a low-ceilinged earthen passage, shored up with timbers that had seen better days. "This way," Eleanor directed, taking the lantern and moving confidently into the tunnel. Silas followed, impressed by her calm under pressure. The passage twisted beneath the main street, occasionally branching in different directions. "Mining tunnels," Eleanor explained as they walked. "When gold was discovered here in '57, men dug everywhere looking for veins. Most found nothing, but the tunnels remained. The town built up right over them. Few remember they exist now." Her knowledge of local history might well have saved their lives, Silas reflected. After several minutes of careful navigation, Eleanor stopped at a vertical shaft with another ladder. "This leads up into the back room of the marshal's office," she informed him, holding the lantern higher to illuminate the ascent. Uncle Emmett and Marshal Wilson were old friends. They used this route for private conversations when necessary. Silas took the lantern from her, examining the ladder to ensure it was sound before gesturing for her to climb. "I'll be right behind you," he assured her. The ladder creaked but held as they ascended, Eleanor pushing open a trapdoor at the top and emerging into what appeared to be a storage room filled with filing cabinets and evidence boxes. Silas followed, closing the trapdoor quietly behind them. Through the closed door, they could hear voices in the main office, Wilson's distinctive gravelly tone and another, higher-pitched and agitated. "That's Harrington," Eleanor whispered, her expression darkening. Silas motioned for her to stay back as he eased the door open slightly, allowing a view of the main office. Wilson stood behind his desk, facing a well-dressed man whose back was to the storage room. "I demand to know on what evidence you're holding Crane," Harrington was saying, his voice tightly controlled, but with an undercurrent of panic. "He's under contract to provide security for the bank. This is highly irregular." Wilson's weathered face revealed nothing as he responded evenly. "Got witnesses placing him at the scene of 3 separate robberies, Mr. Harrington. And some interesting documents suggesting he wasn't acting alone." At the mention of documents, Harrington's posture stiffened visibly. "Documents can be forged, Marshal. I'm sure a man of your experience knows that. Now, I insist you release Crane into my custody immediately, or I'll be forced to telegraph the territorial governor. He and I are old acquaintances, you understand?" The veiled threat hung in the air as Silas pushed the door fully open, stepping into the office with his Colt drawn. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Harrington," he stated calmly, keeping the banker covered as Eleanor followed him into the room. Wilson's expression registered brief surprise before settling into grim satisfaction. Harrington turned slowly, his face draining of color at the sight of Eleanor. "Miss Hart," he managed, attempting to maintain his composure, "I'm relieved to see you safe. There have been reports of armed men in town." His words died as Silas stepped closer, the revolver unwavering. "Save it, Harrington. We found your orders to have Miss Hart killed, same as her uncle." The banker's hand moved subtly toward his coat, but Wilson's voice cracked like a whip. "I wouldn't if I were you. Mr. Blackwood here doesn't miss often, and I'd hate to see brains splattered across my new wallpaper." What followed was a flurry of activity, Wilson disarming Harrington and placing him under arrest. Deputies arriving with news that Dawson had been captured attempting to flee town, and the gradual revelation of a conspiracy that had claimed at least 4 lives in Harrington's ruthless pursuit of land for his railroad interests. Throughout it all, Eleanor remained composed, providing detailed testimony about her uncle's dealings with Harrington and the threats that had preceded his disappearance. As the day waned, Wilson finally dismissed them both, promising that justice would be served. "Got enough evidence to hang both Crane and Harrington 3 times over," he assured them wearily. "Territorial judge arrives next week. Until then, I'd advise you both to keep your guard up." Men like Harrington often have contingency plans. The advice seemed prudent. Silas escorted Eleanor back to her boarding house, both of them watchful, despite the apparent resolution of the immediate threat. "You'll be leaving soon, I expect?" she commented as they reached her door, the setting sun casting long shadows across the porch. It wasn't quite a question, but Silas answered it anyway. "Not right away. Wilson's asked me to stay until after the trial. Wants insurance against any last-minute surprises from Harrington's associates." Eleanor nodded, understanding the practicalities of frontier justice. "I'm grateful, Mr. Blackwood, for everything." She hesitated, then added with careful casualness, "Perhaps you won't join me for supper tomorrow, as a small token of thanks." The invitation surprised him, though not unpleasantly. "I'd be honored, Miss Hart," he replied, tipping his hat before taking his leave. The week that followed saw a gradual return to normalcy in Redemption Creek. Harrington and Crane remained securely behind bars, their confederates either captured or fled. The evening after the arrests, Eleanor returned to her position at the piano in the Silver Dollar, playing with the same quiet dignity as before, though perhaps with less sadness in her melodies. Silas found himself returning each night, nursing a single whiskey while she performed. Their supper together had been pleasant, conversation flowing more easily than either had expected. They discovered shared experiences. Both had lost family in the war. Both had sought new beginnings in the West. There was an understanding between them, unspoken but palpable, of wounds carried and gradually healing. On the third night, after the saloon had emptied, Eleanor invited him to join her on the small bench before the piano. "Do you play, Mr. Blackwood?" she inquired, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. "Silas, please," he corrected gently. "And no, never had the opportunity to learn. My father considered music a frivolity." She smiled at that, a genuine expression that transformed her features. "My father said the same, but my mother taught me in secret. Said music was what separated us from the animals." Her hands began moving across the keys, creating a melody both melancholy and hopeful. This was her favorite piece, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. She played it the night before our home was burned during the war. The personal revelation was offered simply, without self-pity. Silas remained silent, sensing she had more to say. "I was trapped inside," Eleanor continued, her fingers never faltering on the keys. "Union soldiers pulled me out, but not before." Her voice trailed off and her right hand momentarily left the keyboard to touch her collar, where Silas knew scars lay hidden. "The fire took half my face, my neck, my shoulder. The doctors said it was a miracle I survived it all." The music continued, filling the space where words failed. "War leaves no one untouched," Silas said quietly when she had finished playing. His hand moved unconsciously to the scar on his own face, a pale line against tan skin. "Some wounds heal cleaner than others." Eleanor's eyes met his, searching. "Does it bother you, knowing what lies beneath?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The question held more weight than its simple words suggested. Not merely about physical scars, but the deeper wounds they both carried. "No," Silas answered truthfully. "Scars are just evidence of survival, nothing to be ashamed of." Something shifted in her expression then, a releasing of long-held tension. "Most men, they look away, or worse, they stare with pity or disgust. It's why I came west, to be somewhere I could start again, where no one knew." Her hands returned to the piano, picking out a softer melody. "Uncle Emmett never cared about appearances. Said character was what mattered. When he disappeared, I nearly left. But something made me stay. Courage," Silas suggested, his voice roughened by unexpected emotion. "Takes a certain kind to face down men like Harrington, to seek justice when it would be easier to run." Eleanor smiled again, the expression reaching her eyes this time. "Perhaps, or simple stubbornness, a family trait according to Uncle Emmett." They lapsed into comfortable silence, the piano's notes filling the empty saloon with unexpected beauty. When she finally closed the instrument's lid, Eleanor turned to Silas with quiet determination. Would you like to see? The scars, I mean. I've never shown anyone willingly before." The request startled him with its intimacy and trust. "Only if you wish to," he replied carefully. "But please understand, it won't change how I see you." Her hands moved to her collar then, slowly unfastening the high neckline that had kept her secrets hidden. The scarring was extensive, covering the right side of her neck and disappearing beneath her clothing, the skin mottled and puckered from old burns. Eleanor kept her eyes downcast, clearly bracing for rejection. Instead, Silas reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement to give her time to withdraw if she wished. His calloused fingers gently traced the edge of the scarred tissue where it met undamaged skin along her jaw. "Don't look at my scars," she pleaded softly. vulnerability evident in her voice. Silas shook his head, his touch reverent rather than pitying. "They're the most beautiful part of you," he murmured, meaning it entirely. "They tell me you survived, that you endured. There's no greater beauty than that." Tears welled in her eyes then, not of sorrow, but of release, the unburdening of a shame carried too long. Their foreheads touched, a moment of connection deeper than words could express. In the days that followed, something shifted between them, a cautious opening, like spring's first tentative buds after a harsh winter. They spoke of the past, not as a burden to be hidden, but as a shared foundation upon which something new might be built. The judge arrived as scheduled, and the trial proceeded with swift frontier justice. Harrington and Crane were convicted on multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and fraud. The banker's connections proved insufficient to save him from the gallows. Eleanor testified with dignity, finally able to bring her uncle's killers to justice. Silas remained by her side throughout, his steady presence a comfort in difficult moments. When the sentences were pronounced, death for both men, she accepted the verdict with quiet resolution rather than satisfaction. "Justice, not vengeance," she told Silas afterward. "That's what Uncle Ennett would have wanted." The execution date was set for 2 weeks hence, but neither Silas nor Eleanor attended when the day arrived. By then they had already departed Redemption Creek, traveling eastward to settle her uncle's affairs before continuing on to wherever the future might lead them. The night before their departure, Eleanor played one last time at the Silver Dollar, her music filled with a hope that had been absent before. Afterward, they walked under the stars, talking of possibilities that neither had dared consider months earlier. "I've been offered a teaching position. Likely need for a man with my skills?" The implication hung between them that their paths might continue together rather than diverge. As they reached the boarding house porch, Eleanor turned to him, moonlight silvering her hair. "These past weeks, they've changed something in me. I've spent years hiding, ashamed of what the war took from me. But now," she touched her scarred neck, no longer concealed by high collars, "now I can face the world again, because of you." Silas shook his head gently. "Not because of me, because you found your courage again. It was always there." His hand covered hers where it rested against her scars. "We all carry marks from the past, Eleanor, visible or not. The choice is whether they define us or merely describe where we've been." Her free hand reached up to trace the scar along his jawline, her touch gentle yet confident. "Where do we go from here, Silas Blackwood?" she asked, the question encompassing far more than geographical direction. "Forward," he replied simply. "One day at a time. Together, if you'll have a weathered old bounty hunter at your side." Her smile was answer enough, but she spoke the words anyway. "I can think of no better companion for whatever lies ahead." The kiss that followed was tender, a promise exchanged beneath the vast western sky. Neither knew what the future. As dawn broke over Redemption Creek the following morning, they rode out side by side, leaving behind the shadows of the past and moving toward the promise of tomorrow. The scars they carried, both seen and unseen, no longer represented shame or sorrow, but the beautiful, undeniable evidence of survival against all odds. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.